No, it didn't. But anyway, good morning and welcome to today's class. So this is today's intermediates pastel art class, and this is the subject that we're painting for today. And in a moment, I'm going to switch my screen over to the scene where you could be looking down on my table and you'll see what I'm doing from there. So I just wanted to pop in and welcome you to today's class, and then we'll get started. So now I'm going to share my screen. There we go. Onto my iPad. So what I have is an iPad that looks down onto the table I'm working on, which means that you can then see what I'm doing and we can work together. So now you're looking down at my table, and this is my art diary. So the first part of today's class is going to be about drawing our picture up with charcoal. I'm just going to adjust the focus and set that so that it doesn't keep moving around as we move forward. Put a bit more light on there, so that should make it a lot easier for you to see. Please speak up if you have any questions or problems. I do want to hear from you, so if there's something you need to ask or suggest, then don't hesitate to do that. So welcome to today. You've got your printout next to you there, so you should have an A4 page with some notes on here and 2 reference photos. The first photo at the top is your black and white version, which doesn't look terribly different to the colour version because this is a little black and white cat. You can see on the picture, on the colour version, that it's got the blue eyes and a little bit of colour in the background there, so there is a slight difference. But the first part of today's class is just looking at the structure of the picture, drawing it up in charcoal, and then looking at the tones and all the darks and the lights and things that will be important as far as this goes. So let's start with that. I'm just going to turn off the sound because I can hear some background noise. So I'm just going to mute everybody who's here with me today. But as I said earlier, if you do want to speak up and ask any questions, please do. It's just to eliminate background noise. So what I've got is an art diary, and it's just a little book that you can buy in any art shop. It's great for just drawing on, and I have that. It's got all my sketches and things in there from previous classes. So it keeps it all together nice and tidy in one place, because charcoal can get a little bit messy. I've got a little stick of charcoal, tin of charcoal sticks here. So these are what I use just to do my quick drawings. I also can use them with my pastels. So that's a nice little set. It's just a cheapy one from Whatnot, and I find that's good enough for this kind of work. So for today, we're going to draw up our dimensions. So I mentioned in these notes today that this picture is actually slightly smaller than your regular A4 page. So it measures 19 by 28 centimetres. Now, the reason you need to try to be precise with your measurements is so that everything is in proportion. Now, it may well fit into an A4 page if you want to convert it to an A4, but for this exercise, I think maybe just when we do the colour version anyway, measure up 19 by 28 and see how you go. For this part of the picture though, I'm just going to freehand draw roughly the dimensions of the picture. So it's a landscape layout today, which means that it's wider across the top and bottom and then narrower down the sides. I'm doing this quite freely. I'm not going to use rulers and things at this point because I just want to use this part of the class to loosen up and relax and get used to being in art mode and just zone out for a little bit. And I just find that by relaxing at the beginning really helps to, help you get into the right kind of mood. So what I've done now is I've drawn up the outline of my picture, and I've also put my crosshairs on. So you can see on the coloured picture on your notes there that I've put a line down the centre and then a line across the middle so that we've got pages divided into 4 pieces. I find that a lot easier when drawing something up, just to break it up into segments. It just makes it, helps me anyway, to put things where they need to be and helps you get some perspective. Because, for instance, when you look at this picture, you would think the eyes must be huge because that's the first thing you kind of see. But then when you start to draw it and realise how much space the eyes actually take up in the scheme of things, you realise that they're really not as big as you imagined. So sometimes it's good to have measurements and references that will help you get precise with those things so that you don't exaggerate things and make them bigger or smaller than they really are. Unless, of course, you want to do abstracts and do that deliberately, which is also cool and fun. So what I'm going to do is look at each quarter of the page. I'm going to start on the bottom left quarter today and just break up all the little shapes that I can see inside that quarter. If it helps, cover up everything else so that you don't get distracted. So you might have a bit of paper or something you can put over the other 3 sections of the picture and just look at the shapes within this. So everything becomes a shape. It's no longer a cat, it's a shape and it's a tone or a shade. So what I'm looking at now is the underside of the mouth, and I'm just going to draw in this kind of rectangular shape that I can see here. It's the dark shape that's coming down through there. And so it's quite dark in there, so you can actually shade that a little bit to help you find that shape within the fur. The other shape I can see is the shape of the paw that's kind of sitting forward, isn't it? So when something comes towards you like that, they call it foreshortening. So that means that it's coming towards, it's like an arm. You know, if I'm holding my arm out towards you, you can't see my whole arm. You can only see my hand and then off into the distance towards my shoulder. So it's actually quite a short shape rather than drawing a whole arm, because it wouldn't work if that was the case, depending on your perspective. So this is called foreshortening. And so the little paw here is sitting here in the foreground. And I'm just going to work out how much space that takes up. So it actually starts just beyond halfway across the bottom of the quarter section here. And then it comes up and across, and it comes over off to the left-hand side at about halfway down in this quarter. So it takes up about that much space. And we don't have to be too precise with the shapes or detail at this stage. We just want to really just mark in where everything kind of sits. And then as I'm looking at that little paw, I'm just zooming in a little bit and noticing that it's really dark in the foreground there. So when you look at the picture itself, you can see there's a lighter area where the claws are, and then it's kind of darker in the fur around the claws because it's receding away from the claws, and it's also a different texture. So if you just mark in those dark shapes, that will start to come to life and it'll start to look like the front of the paw. So it's really important to notice what shapes things are and to determine those, and then just draw what you see without drawing what you think is there, because often, you know, if you think an arm is this long, we'll draw it too long because it's what we expect or think it should be, but most times it's completely different. So that's basically the shapes that I can see within that section. And then around underneath, come under the little chin there, and so then it gets dark there as well. Not quite as dark as we come down to the bottom of the picture here in this segment. I'll come down to, have it come down low enough. So I can just use my kneadable eraser, wonderful things, to remove some of that and then change my shape. So I look at the shape of the mouth of the kitten in here. It's darker underneath where it's lying on the surface, and then it gets dark as it goes away in towards the arm. So I know that looks a bit strange, but that's basically the things we need to be noticing in this segment. All right, so let's move up into the top left corner now. And you can see, I think I said in the notes, if you wanted to use a light coloured paper, you could actually leave that part, the top left corner, kind of unfilled, for want of a better word. And then you would just want to put in the very soft edges of the cat. So it's like a disappearing edge up here, isn't it? So disappearing edges are things that kind of just wander off into the background. They don't have any hard lines or definite endings or beginnings. They just kind of go softly off into the background and merge into whatever's there. So if you're going to fill your background in, then you might want to have a very subtle difference between the colour of the edge of the cat that's around here and the colour of your background. Or if you wanted to do something like a black paper and then have a light cat on the front of that, you could do that as well. So then you wouldn't have a disappearing edge so much. You would have a very distinctive edge, depending on what colour paper you want to use or what colour background you want to have. So you have lots of options and decisions to make when you're doing this kind of thing. But if it's easier to do what you see, then that's what I would do, because sometimes we can get ourselves a bit unstuck when we try and do something different. So up into this quarter, so I'm going to cover up that bottom section so I don't confuse myself. And I can see we've got all this lovely darkish fur. So that's from the leg that's coming up here. And then we come up and we've still got a little bit of dark underneath the whiskers there. So it's got a darker tone coming across through here. Now over to the side, so this is where the face is, under the eye. You can see there's a soft little shape. So everything's quite soft in this picture today. We don't have any hard lines other than in the ear or eye probably. So everything's sort of soft and gentle and wispy. So there's no hard, fast lines. So it's going to be very subtle changes in tone as we run around this thing. And then when we want to put some whiskers, because we've already got some dark down, you can use your kneadable eraser and mark in some of the whisker kind of marks that you might want to pop in there. I forgot to put the nose in down there. I was so focused on the other stuff. Anyway, we'll get back to that in a sec. All right, so a bit of grey through there, and I'm just running my charcoal lightly over the paper and not letting it do too many hard lines because it's all very soft and gentle. Where you might want to add more white or make it a bit whiter again, you can actually use your kneadable eraser and just take some of the charcoal off, because you get quite a lot of charcoal on there, and often you want to remove it or get the white back. So if that's what you need to do, just use your kneadable eraser and you can reshape that. So if I want to do some whiskers and get the white back in with the whiskers on this area here, I can just make a little knife edge with my eraser and do those little lines out from the edges there that will hopefully look a little bit like whiskers once we're finished with this. You can do the same down through here too. So we'll just go back into that bottom quarter for a minute and do the same thing. Put a few little whiskers around in through there, just on top of that dark section. So it kind of makes it more fun when it starts to come alive like that. I haven't done a whole lot on tone yet, so we can come back and shade and lighten some of those spots once we get the main drawing in. But as I said, we didn't get the nose section in down here. So let's pop that in. So I can see that it starts probably about a quarter of the way down inside this quarter, and it comes across through here. So it's quite a distinct little shape. Something like that. And it's got quite a dark edge around it. So you can see where the edges of it are, and then it's a grey and kind of pink colour. So we're marking all the things you can see there, and then we've got these soft little hairs that kind of come out from around it. So you can do those little marks too if you'd like. About now. Then I'm just going to blend that in gently, gently, and soften that off. So the nice thing with the charcoal is that you can actually put your fingers into here and just soften off all your edges a little bit and make everything a bit softer and not so hard. And then it looks more natural. So I'm just smudging all the dark areas and kind of pulling it around in the direction of the hair. So just trying to get that lovely soft fluffy kind of effect. So at this stage, when you've just done these 2 quarters, it doesn't really look like anything terribly much because you know, we're just putting in shapes and tones and things. So there's not a whole lot of information there to tell us what this is. It all looks a little bit strange and probably needs to have a bit more work as far as tone goes to help to, you know, give it some more body. So for instance, the leg there could be a bit darker. And then again, we can darken off the other section in between the face and the leg, because then when we pop the white whiskers over that, they're going to pop out and have a lot more volume and look nice and bright against the dark. And so again, you can come back with your eraser and do some little wispy lines at the edges of it just to indicate some of those hairs. So we'll just, this is a very short exercise. I don't want to spend a whole bunch of time on it. I mean, you might want to come back to it later on and really get stuck into the charcoal and finish it off, because charcoal is a beautiful medium to work with. It really is a very nice medium. So I'm just noticing where the little whiskers come out on the side of the face there, putting some dark little marks in there. And I keep forgetting to mention, when you're looking at this, just look at your black and white picture so that you can see how light and dark all the different parts are. Because the thing that's going to really make this pop today is the contrasts. It's the lights and the darks that we use. Okay, so I've messed up enough of that part, so let's go over to the other quarters now. So I'm going to move my picture across so I don't distract myself too much. Cover up that half so that all I'm focusing on now is these 2 quarters. So I'm going to start in this top right quarter. And of course, the main thing that's in there is the eye. So working out where that eye sits in relation to this quarter. And it sits probably about this far in on the bottom and about that far in on the top. So that's about the width of the eye space that we want to have in there. And then getting the shape in there, so just noticing the shape of it and how it comes down across the bridge of the nose and then down into that bottom quarter. So that's essentially the shape of the eye in that space. Could be a tad wide. So what I want to do now is I'm just going to mark in the pupil of the eye. That sits about there. And then round out around where the little tear duct area is. The eyeball itself is quite round, but we've got this triangular cat shape of the eye itself, the outline of the eye. And then we've got this dark kind of fur that comes across there. Now the rest of everything is all fur, isn't it? It's all lovely and soft. And so to achieve that, I'm going to actually grab another bit of charcoal. I want a short, fat piece because that's going to help me to get this kind of furry effect better, I think, than a longer piece. Because what I want to do is hold it on its side on the paper and just sort of run it across so that I'm getting, hopefully, the feeling of these little hairs by running it across this way. So I'm not getting really hard little marks and hard lines. I'm making soft marks and soft lines. And by using the edge of the charcoal, I can get a much softer line and a little bit more varied as well in the width or the shape of it. So that's kind of the feeling I want to achieve with that. Of course, the eye itself is not white, so we can soften that off with a little bit of grey. And again, if you look at the black and white version, you can see that it's quite grey, and then we've got this beautiful little shine in there, and that's what brings it to life, isn't it? So that's one eye, and just roughly, we're not spending a chunk of time on this, it's just a little rehearsal, so when we do this again, you'll already know some of it. I'm just going to run around the top of this and mark in some of the darker bits of hair that I can see, or the shapes. You know how this cat's got all these distinctive little dark lines that kind of run across the top of the head down towards the nose. And so that's the shape or tones that I want to get marked into there. And again, I'm just using my little bit of charcoal on its side, so I'm getting a much softer mark and I'm covering a bigger area. It's quite light, all the hair around the top of the eye on the right hand side from where we're looking at it is quite light up around in here. So I've tried to leave that sort of unpainted or undrawn on so that I can still retain some of the white of the paper to be that white. When we do it in pastels, we'll use light coloured pastels to do that. So just coming around there, looking at the eye, noticing that it's, you know, got darker fur at the base of the eye and comes down and kind of meets on the bridge of the nose there, which is on the left hand side of this quarter. So we're slowly working our way around. This will make a little bit more sense, hopefully, once we kind of get each quarter section done and then uncover it. All right, so let's move on to, we'll put the shine in the eyes at the end. So let's move on to the next eye. So that one is actually all the way over here. When you look at where it sits within this bottom quarter, it's all the way over here. And when I would go and draw that closer in to the other one and probably right underneath it. But because this space is on an angle, it's a little bit tricky. So just make sure that you notice where within this quarter the little eye sits. And you can do things like when you're looking at the picture, if you have a ruler handy, you can hold your ruler onto the paper like that and look at where everything lines up. So for instance, the top of the eye there, the first eye that we just did, that lines up only just with the tear duct of this eye. So if I now put my ruler there, I can see I've come too far over. So I actually need to bring this eye back further here and bring the tear duct to there at an extreme. So doing that kind of thing and measuring things in relation to each other really does help to get everything in the right place as well. So always, you know, give yourself reference points, because when you are drawing things up, it's important to make sure that you get things in the right spot. And if I put them closer together or on the wrong angle, then it's not going to look right. So just, you know, always use whatever you can to help you find where things fit. So I can look at the distance from the edge of this second eye to the page, the edge of the page, and I can see, you know, there's about, what's that one? Yeah, it'd be less than a quarter of the width of this quarter close to the page. So it's reasonably close to the page, and it's fairly low down as well in the page. So isn't that interesting? I would have made it so much closer. Cool. Good to know, good to know. So now it's starting to make some sense. And then if you have your short stumpy bit of charcoal, which I have kept using instead of picking up my others, then you can kind of just start to mark in those dark areas again around the eyes. So the patterns or the shapes of this distinctive fur. And then looking at the nose and the line of the nose and how that comes down around this area here. And we've got a darker section just under there inside this quarter and down here through the eye. So as we go, we'll have to keep checking that everything's in the right spot. And we've got the nose there. So all these things make a huge difference. I just feel like this eye should be slightly over a little bit, but maybe it's just the dark from that underneath. Yeah. So now we've got that sort of all in place and figured it out. And if you didn't get it right this time, then we'll have another opportunity when we do the coloured version. And hopefully when we take everything off, it all starts to look like it should be. So that's close enough. Definitely needs a lot more work. But we'll get stuck into that on the colour version and really work on all the tones and the softness of the fur and things. Cats are fun to do. But before we go, we might just pop a little bit of light into the eyes because that's always the highlight, isn't it? It's getting the shine at the end. So use your kneadable eraser and just dab some of the charcoal off on a couple of the spots in the eyes where you can see the little highlights, especially those little ones in, there's one on inside the pupil there, on that top eye, and then there's another, and there's two little spots over in the right hand eye. You might need to darken off around it so that the light stands out a bit more. So that's not perfect anywhere near, but it's a good start, and it's just making sure that we you have a little practice run for how to draw this guy. Now, has anyone got any questions or comments? Does you have anything you want to say or ask about before we move on? All good? Okay. What I like about this picture is that up in the left-hand corner, it's nice and light. So I've got all this beautiful light kind of feeling, and you can tell that the light is coming from that direction because it's hitting on this bridge here of the nose around this eye. So it's really bright or very light coloured fur there, but it's also where the light's hitting because you can see the direction that it's hitting into the eyes as well. And then on the little nose, so that'll become a nice little area that we can kind of highlight as well. And all of those things tell us the direction that the light's coming in. So that's important to kind of keep that in the back of your mind, because then you'll know where to put your shadows and your lights going forward. So you can come back to this afterwards if you want to refine it a little bit more and keep working on it. Because as I said, charcoal's a lovely medium and it's quite pleasant to work on that. And just play with black and white too. It's a really good process to practice, because then you sort of get a much better understanding of your tones and lights and darks and how they all kind of work together. I'm just going to put black whiskers in there because I'm being lazy. All right. So we might finish up with that part for now and get on to doing the coloured version. So I think I said in our notes that a light coloured paper would be good. Doesn't really matter though, as I mentioned earlier, if you are happier to do this on black paper and maybe leave some of the black paper showing here, have the lighter fur coming forward on that, that would be lovely too. So it's up to you as to what colour you want to use. I'm going to go for, I picked this up yesterday at work, so it's like a light blue. grey-blue kind of colour, and I thought that's quite nice with the cat because it's got similar tones in there. I thought that would work quite nicely with the greys that are already in there. So it doesn't really matter, just it's up to you, your personal taste as to what colour paper you want to use. But that's the one I've grabbed out for today. And that means that when we get to this edge of the fur, I'm going to try and sort of soften it off and let it, blend into the background a little bit. See how we go. That's always a challenge too. So first thing I want to do is tape my paper down. I've got my blue tape here, and I'm just going to pop a little bit on each corner. When you're working flat, that's probably fine. If you're on an easel, then you want to tape it all the way around, or at least bottom and top, to keep it in place, because you don't want to have to hold it all the time. I like to have a free hand to pick up other things and not have to hold my paper down. So I'm just taping it down gently on the corners. Don't press too hard because you want it to come off fairly easily afterwards and not tear. It is easy to tear it if you push it down too hard or leave it on for too long. So just make sure you either stick it onto something first before you put it on your paper so you get a bit of the adhesive off, and then tape it down. So I find that's usually the best option. So now I've got that taped down onto my board, got a little wooden board here, so that gives me a nice firm surface to work on, and I can pick that up and move that around if I need to. To draw this up, I'm going to use charcoal. And as I said, we need to measure up our size. So I said it was 19 by 28. So I'm going to do that. So 28 is to there. What I'm doing is leaving a little border around the edges. So I've come in either side. This page is 30 wide. So I'm just going to come in on 1 centimetre on each side. So that will make my picture 28. Now, as I said earlier, if you want to kind of expand yours beyond that size and fill out the rest, then that's cool. Go for it. But for the purposes of this class, I'm going to stick to the size. So that's 28 wide. So I'm working within that parameter there. And then the width of this is 23, and I want it to be 19. So 23 minus 19 is 4. So then I'd leave 2 centimetres on the top and the bottom edge, approximately. This is a 23 by 30 piece of paper. So hopefully that works out. Yep, that's 19. So see how it's a little bit more narrow than our normal size. I'm going to work within that parameter there, just so everything stays in proportion. So I'll end up with a little border around here. But as I said, you can expand your picture beyond that if you want to. Yeah, the proportions didn't quite fit into A3 or 2, 1, 4, any of those A1s, A4. So sometimes pictures just don't quite fit into the size you want. So you've either got to adjust the size of your picture or zoom out on the picture to get it to fill up your space. But as I said earlier, by zooming out, if I had zoomed out, I would have lost some of this eye or some of the top of the head or some of the paw. And I felt that then it was kind of, it didn't give me enough information to make a good painting. So that's why it's a weird size today. Sorry about that. It's always nice if you can do it, in a standard size, so that then you can find a frame to fit. Okay, so now we're going to do our halfway lines. So 28, half of that's 14. I'm going to put my grid line on there. Again, I'm still using charcoal. Charcoal's lovely because it comes off easily. It also works really well with pastels, so you don't have to worry about it not coming off. Measurements are a bit off there. I think I went crooked somewhere. So half of 19 then is, where's that? 9.5. So then I'm going to find my other centre mark. And again, we'll work in quarters as we just draw this up lightly, and then we can start to block in the darks and the lights and so forth. So that's the area that we're working in. Keep your reference photo nearby so that you can refer to that, because that's what you want to be looking at mostly, to get all the bits and pieces in the right spot. I've also got it on an iPad here next to me, so I can refer back to that as well and look at where things are, and I can zoom in and get more information. So that's always handy if you can have those two options. Otherwise, one is fine. So let's do a similar thing to what we did before, and what we're going to do is just literally draw up the basic lines or shapes that are in this picture. So I'm just coming down and drawing in the side of the face, around through here. And I'm just keeping my lines quite light because, as I said earlier, there's no hard, strong lines through here. Everything has a soft edge. So we just want to get the basic shapes marked in, and then we can start to softly, softly apply the colour to create the fur. So this section over here, even though there's no hard lines, I'm just kind of roughly drawing in where the side of the cat is on the shoulder there. So I'm kind of working in half the page at the moment and getting all the shapes in there. So then I can see from where the arm comes down, or the leg, we've got this dark section in there. And so it's more than half, so it's about there. It comes down. And then we've got that claw, so that gorgeous little claw at the front. So it's quite strong, that little shape there. So that's a nice little dark spot that we can put in afterwards. And then we've got the shape of the paw, which has a little slight dip in the top there. And it's dark down in here and dark down through there. So I'm just holding my charcoal quite loosely and just gently marking in, the lines and the shapes and things that I can see within the fur and within the body. So that's kind of the shape I want in there. I just realised, yeah, so always measuring too. I'm just checking the width of the paw in relation to the size of that quarter. So if it's about 10, it comes to just beyond halfway. So if it's 7, so I've come over a bit too wide, it should be to there. So it doesn't hurt to check your measurements as you go, and if you have to use a ruler, then do that. It's important when you're doing things like animals and bodies to get your proportions right. That's about a third, less than a third. Yep. Just noticing where all your lines and edges need to be. Okay. So that's most of that in there. We need to get the little nose in there. So the nose comes in about a quarter of the way down in this segment here. So if halfway is there, then that's about a quarter. It comes down through here, around, down. This little funny little shape there. So that's sort of the nose shape there. So as I said before, charcoal is awesome because you can get it off easily. So don't worry if putting a mark in the wrong place, it'll come off pretty easily down the track, or we can just blend it in with the pastels. So that's the nose area. So far we've got the leg and the paw coming through here. We've got the side of the face and the nose. And then the side of the face kind of comes off to the edge just across here. and it lies down literally on the edge of your picture. I just had a thought too, if this is confusing you and you feel like you're not sure where to go because of the size or the dimensions, you can always do something like this if that's confusing you. So you can always mask off or tape off the area of the paper that you're not going to colour in or fill up, and that might help to give you a border that you can kind of work within. So if that's something that might help you, then by all means do that. Before you do though, just make sure you stick your tape down onto your tablecloth or something like this first, and then take it off, and then it won't be quite so sticky. So you can pop it down lightly and mask off around the area that you're going to be drawing in, and that will definitely help to keep within your boundaries, if that makes it easier for you. Some people need to do that, others don't. I'll do it today just so you can see what I'm talking about. And then if you prefer not to, you might want to extend your picture up to fill up the page. So for instance, over up the top here, you would have to imagine where that would go, but you could kind of keep moving it up into the top there, but you'd have to extend the head up as well. So you'd have to have a bit of an idea of if you could see an ear or not up in that part. So I'm not going to do that because I'm not very good at that sort of thing. I can only really draw what I see. I'm not good at making it up or imagining it. So what I'm going to do is stay within these boundaries, and that way I don't confuse myself. So see how by masking that off with some tape really helps to keep it confined into that space. So that's just a little theory, and you don't have to do it, but it is quite helpful if you're a visual person and need to know where the edges really are. So doing that kind of thing is good. Okay. Actually, it is way better. I can see that already. Cool. All right. So just a little distraction there. So we'll get back now to our picture. And so what I'm looking for now is the positioning of this top eye in this top right-hand corner. And as we go, we can kind of just mark in some of the shapes that you can see. So I can see there's a shape that looks like a bit of a cheek or something, that dark line just there on the top or above the eye. I'm going to say above the eye because that's the angle we're looking at it from. If you were looking at it front on, you'd say beside the eye. But in our case, it's above the eye, and it gets quite dark all the way up to the edge there. So now let's figure out where this eye sits again. I'm going to use my ruler on the picture and find, so that's 10 across there, 9.5. I'm going to push that across and pretend it's 10. So that's halfway there. So the other thing you can do if you wanted to is put more grid marks on. So for instance, I can draw in another line on my reference photo. So that might be helpful for you too if you want to break it down into smaller segments and then just work within this segment and then do this segment rather than trying to imagine where halfway is or quarter way is or whatever. So I can see already by doing that, just with my charcoal on my picture, that, and I will make sure that that is halfway. So, yep. So now I can see that if I just break it down into this little section here, which will be 1/8 of the picture, I can see that the eye sits closer to that line than that line. And so it's slightly up. It's not halfway through this part. So do you see how I mean? I'm kind of breaking it down into segments to make it easier. The other awesome thing is that I can now see where this eye begins in this segment. So if you want to put in an extra line, by all means do that. So I will do that over here. So I'm going to find my halfway line over here. It just gives you more information, and it's about making things a lot easier just for yourself, to fit things in and find where they sit. And it's important when you're doing this kind of work, especially with things that have structure like cats or animals. So what I'm looking for now is, where does the top of the eye start, or the point of the eye? And it starts just above halfway. So halfway is about there. It starts about here, I would say. And then it comes across, and how close is it to this line? It's saying it's about here. And I'm going to carry that down into the nose section. So I want to have that continuous line down into the nose there. So that works, that makes sense. It all kind of joins up now. And then I can do the shape of the eye underneath, the left-hand side of the eye from our perspective, through there. And then that comes, the dark of that comes all the way almost over to the centre mark there, doesn't it? It's quite dark in there. The eye itself is smaller than that. It sits through here and then up and through there. So you can kind of see there's a much darker kind of rim around the eye, and that's where the tear duct and all the skin is, through here. And then we have this lovely dark fur coming down beside the nose and into that section there. So that's telling me, I think that's pretty close to where the eye needs to be. Probably could be down a tad. Yep. Right, so I'm going to move it back. So this is what we need to do during the whole process, is just keep checking, checking, checking. So it was a little bit too high, I think. So I wanted to bring it closer down to about there. That's better. So always checking your drawing, and this is the vital stage, because this is when you need to get the drawing in the right spot. You need to get all your bits and bobs in the right places, so that when we start to put the colour on, the drawing's there and you don't have to worry about that again. So this is the time when you really want to make sure that you get that in the right place. I'm just comparing that again now. I'm looking at this line. This line comes all the way through there. Top of the eye and then bottom of the eye. I've got all that lovely skin and the tear duct area there. And then, of course, the most appealing, or the thing that draws your eye first, is the eyeball. And it's such a lovely blue colour. And then we've got that gorgeous little shine on it. So that'll be the highlight, obviously, once we get everything in the right spot. All right, so now I'm going to come down. I'm just going to look at the nose for a minute, and I want to get the shape of that right as well as we come up into this segment here. So it's kind of got this little round end on the nose, haven't we, that comes around here. And then down into this funny little shape there. And then we've got the mouth that comes under there. So it's all a bit loose and haphazard at the moment, but once we get some colour in, it'll start to make sense. The nose is quite dark. It's got a fair bit of brown and pink in there, which is nice. And then we have this like a shadow line. It's all very subtle, so lots of tone in here. So that's one eye done, and then we've got the nose and the side of the face down through here. And then I'm going to pop the other eye in, so I just want to see where that sits within this section now, because we've broken this down into smaller sections, so it's easier to see. And it sits just about on that line there. It comes around like that. So it's got a more straight top across the eyelid, and then rounded around the base. And we've got the pupil there. So again, we've got all this lovely dark section around the eye. And then I'm going to just pick up my shorter bit of charcoal. I just want to mark in those cat-like marks that are around the forehead there, sort of like a stripe almost. Come darker down into the nose, and then we've got lines and marks across the top here. There we go. So now we need to just reassess everything. Make sure that your eyes are sitting where they need to be. Measure them up if you have to. See how far away from the edges of your page they are, or from your guidelines, those lovely marks that we put in. I can't tell you how important it is to put these grid lines in. They really help to get everything into the right place. So good. There we go. So I think that's starting to look like a cat to a degree. And I've just been kind of using the charcoal to mark in some of the darker spots, but we'll do some pastel in a sec with that. Marking off the little claw there. So what I really liked was the angle of this one. The cat's just lying there looking at you, as they do. They're a law unto themselves, cats, aren't they? There we go. So that's probably going to be enough information now to get started with. This is the drawing phase, and then we can get stuck into the colour. So we have to pick out some colours, and I did go and grab some earlier. So I'll show you what I've got to start with, and then you might feel like you want to add some other colours, or take some out or whatever, and that's fine. But it's always good to start off with a basic palette, just to get a bit of an idea of what you might be using. So just to pop the colours down onto a page, I'm going to just use the edge of my art diary page, because I like to make little swatches and colour match things. Just move a few things around. So I've just got a bit of clean white paper there. There's my photo. And now I've got some colours here. So what I picked out, I've tried to have a nice range from dark to light. So I've got my usual blue violet here, which is the darkest one. So that's going to be lovely in the shadows and the dark areas under there. I've also got this beautiful dark magenta. Now, I don't know if I'll use that. I just love it too much and I can't put it down. So, but it might be nice just for a bit of warmth in the darker areas, I thought. I'll try to put these in order from light to dark. The next colour I've got is this kind of olivey green, and it sort of matches what I can see on the nose, that browny colour. So I thought, maybe that'll work in there. So I've got that one, and I've got a dark grey, because I want the dark grey for all the dark fur. And then where I need to add more dark, I can either add black or my blue violet. And then I can also add, lighter colours over it to bring out some of the lighter fur. I picked up purple too. I don't know whether I'll use purple. I probably will. But I feel like that might be a nice mid-tone in some of this hair. So I thought that could be fun to play with. And I've also got blue. So blue's for the eyes. And we could maybe put a little bit through the fur as well. So there's that blue. And then I grabbed this blue as well, which is kind of more aqua, beautiful blue. So I thought I could mix those two in for the eyes. If you don't have exactly the same colours as these, then that's fine. We're not all going to have the same colours. So just use what you've got. If you've only got two blues, then that's what we'll use. So don't stress about it too much. We'll have to make do with what's what. This is a lighter blue. I thought that might also be nice in the eyes. So 3 blues for the eyes, or only 2 if that's all you've got. Just to get, you know, you can see there's quite a lot of range of tone in those eyes. It's kind of darker blue and then it gets a little bit lighter. And there might be a greeny tinge in there. You can make your eyes green if you don't have blues, or yellow. You know, cats have yellow eyes too. So, you know, if blue isn't going to work for you, then consider using other colours that you might have more of. So you don't have to do exactly the same colours. And then I've got a few light colours here. So I've picked up this very light apricot kind of colour. I thought that might work up there on the edge of the fur, sort of as I want to push it into my background a little bit. And also a little bit around the nose possibly. So that's my apricot. And then I've got a pink as well, because I can see pink in the nose. So that's just a light pink. If you don't have those colours, then maybe just one pink will be fine. Then I've got a light grey. This is a warm grey, which is beautiful. So that would be nice for some of the lighter fur. And I have Australian grey, which is also lovely. It's more of a creamy colour. So a couple of lights as well, just to sit on top of the darks and to do a bit of alternating between light and dark fur. And then, of course, I've got white. So white will be the final little shine in the eye and a couple of whiskers and bits and pieces. If you've got pencils, then that'll be helpful too. So I have got a charcoal pencil here, white charcoal pencil. I love white charcoal pencils. I find they're actually a little bit lighter than a pastel pencil sometimes. So that's a really nice one to have. And I've got a black pencil. I've got stacks of pencils. I just haven't got them here next to me. But yeah, a few pencils are very handy, especially for things like whiskers and, you know, fine lines around nose and the dark bits in the eye and that kind of thing. So a couple of pencils are handy. But if you don't have pencils, we can still do this with pastels, and I'll show you how. Okay, cool. So that's my little palette that I've picked out to start painting this guy with. I think we might have a bit of a break now and get a cuppa, and then we'll come back and start getting some colour down onto the page and work on our colour version. I'm going to leave all of this sitting here for a little while so you can refer back to it if you need to see what colours I've got, etc. And we'll come back. So it's 10:33. So I think we might come back at 10:40. That's 7 minutes or so, and get stuck into it then. Okay, so welcome back, and now we're going to get started on doing the colour version. You've got your drawing all organised, you've got your eyes staring at you, and hopefully they're in the right spot. So by using those grid marks, we should have got them all lined up where they need to be. And sometimes if you are not sure, it's best to stand up and walk away and come back. So that's another good reason to have a little break, is just to walk away from what you've been doing. And then when you come back, you have a better view of things. Because when you look at something for too long, you kind of can't see what needs to happen. So first thing we're going to do, we've already marked in some of the dark areas with charcoal, and we can keep using charcoal. It's quite lovely to use. But what I want to do first up is use my blue violet. That's my darkest pastel, and start to mark in some of the darker areas, or the darkest areas in here. So this is the blocking in process. And what I want to do is just get some darks down so that we can start to then build up all the other tones and the lights. And doing this, kind of look at your picture. So this area that I'm doing at the moment is in, you know, between the face and the arm. So it's going away into the distance and we can't really see any detail in there. And there's a lot of shadow in there. So what's going to be nice at the end is when we put our white edge of the face against this dark and then pop some whiskers over the top, it's really going to give it some lovely, you know, a focal point, I suppose, where the light meets the dark. So always thinking ahead about, you know, how's this going to work afterwards, and how can I make that maybe darker so that the light looks lighter. And just thinking about your contrasts and how things are going to work together. So I'm just blocking this in. I'm using the pastel on its side because I just want to use big wide marks at this stage, and just to get a bit of dark down onto the paper. Don't put too much down. If you are using this blue violet, Blender's blue violet it is, deep or dark, it's very strong. So it stains the paper and it's hard to get off. So I like to sort of start off lightly with this colour and just gently, gently push it in and build it up. So we're just going to do one light layer of this now, noticing where it's darkest. I'm just blocking it in. I'm running around the picture, around the edge of the nose, on the tip of the nose, on the ball of the nose. It's quite dark, so I'm putting a bit there. Down inside, you know, the eye where the tear duct area is. Pull a bit of it down through there. Don't put any in the eye just yet. We might leave those alone for a minute because what we want to do is get that blue really rich and blue before we add any dark to there than what we've already got with the charcoal at this point. So leave the eyes for now. We can come back and clean them up and you know, put some darks and lights in there afterwards. So as I'm pulling this around, I'm kind of pulling the pastel in the direction of the shapes that I can see. So, you know, above the eyes here and between the eyes, we've got those little stripes, like tiger stripe patterns. But instead of doing hard, sharp lines with the end of my pastel, I'm just lying it on the paper and I'm just letting it be a soft sort of mark rather than a hard line. That way the edges of your lines are not too strong. So once you've got a bit of that down, pop your pastel away and we're going to push it into the paper now. Now this is the time when you kind of get worried a little bit that you might lose some of your drawing or your lines and not remember where you were. And that can happen, but the nice thing is we've already done a little rehearsal. We've already sort of had a go at this and you've got a bit of an idea of where things are now. And if you need to, you can always go back and put grid lines back in or find the edges of your grid lines. So for instance, if I had drawn my lines up after I'd put my tape down, I might have a little mark like this around on the edges of my picture so I could find those lines again if I lose them. So it's always an idea if you want to keep or not remember where they were, just to keep those little lines on the outside of your painting around the border so that if you need to figure out where the eye was and you lose it in the midst of smudging everything, you can kind of find where the lines were and put them back in. So yeah, it's always good to have a little reference point if you can manage to. So what I'm doing here is I'm just literally lightly just running my fingers around and blending in all this dark. What I want it to do is hang on to the paper and to sort of stick so that it's not going to be sitting on the surface and messing up the next layer of colour that I put down. I mean, everything will blend together. It's what pastels do. But if it's pushed in, then it won't, you know, kind of be picked up quite as easily. So I'm just using my finger and pulling it through in the direction that the fur is growing, basically, especially up here around the head area. So if you're pulling it from, you know, the top of the nose up to the outside of the head, then you start to create the feeling of the fur and the direction that it's moving in. So see how that's kind of all softened off now. So you can see that why they call it blue violet, because it's got this lovely violet undertone to it, and it's really lovely for creating your darks and your shadows. So I've pushed most of that in. Push a bit of it in on the leg here, or the arm. We call it an arm for the sake of this exercise. And you've noticed I've left this area up here with no dark because it's all mid-tone. It's all about the same tone as my paper colour. And as I said, if you might be doing a dark paper and you want to have light fur, then you'll have to put your edges in, and that's cool. You can do that. Easy peasy. So I just want to push some of this in so I haven't got any loose dust floating around on my paper. And then I'm going to tip off what is running around, because there's always going to be dust that will have to be dropped or tipped off your page. Try to resist the urge to blow it, because when you do that, you'll end up with it all over your house and shoes and everything. So that's basically all pushed in now. So it's a really nice base to start with. Now we've got some darks in there. So I'm going to tip off my dust onto my little cloth over here. I can shake that outside later. So now most of the loose dust has been tipped off. Or some has, didn't all go. The other nice thing about putting a border of tape around here is that when I peel it off later, I'll get a nice clean edge. So that's another advantage of doing that. You're going to have a clean edge underneath. So you could potentially frame it. You just have, you know, more border around it. Okay, sip of coffee. So next thing I want to do before we do any more with the fur, I want to get stuck into these eyes and bring them to life. And the reason is because they're kind of sitting back inside the head, so to speak, and the fur is around them. So I like to do things that are in the back or behind first, so that then we can kind of build up around it. So let's work on the eyes, and then we'll move over into this back area here, and then we'll start building up the fur and all the other bits and pieces that are in front. So the eyes are a beautiful colour, and depending on what colour you've decided you want yours to be, then grab that. I'm going to start with this aqua kind of blue colour and put that down. So when you put it down, you'll realise that there's really not a lot of space for this. The eyes are not really as big as we imagine. Go over the little black bit too. We can put that back in afterwards. So this is just the first coat. So we're getting one layer of blue or green or whatever you're using down on there. So I've started with my mid blue. I'm going to add a little bit of a darker blue in a minute. So I want to build this up and get a little bit of a nice range of blues basically, because they're not just one flat blue colour. If you have a little hand towel nearby that's wet on one end, that'll be helpful just to clean your fingers off in between colours. So now this is my darker blue, so I'm going to pop a bit of that. I can see around the outline or the edges of the eyeball, it's a little darker. So if I just gently smush some of this around in those parts, and don't worry about the outlines. If you go over the outlines, it's okay, we can clean them up afterwards. We'll do the fine work after. But what I want to do is just get a nice variation of blues in here. Now I've put the two blues down, so I can just gently blend them in, just with my finger. You might find it easier if you have a blender that's handy. So rubber tipped blenders are always really good too. And as you do that, you're probably pulling in some of the charcoal or the other colours around there, and maybe making them a bit muddy. That's okay. I don't mind doing that, because it kind of gives things it gives them form. So, you know, pulling a little bit of dark into that is not going to hurt. It'll actually create that lovely round feeling that we want, because they're not a flat thing, are they? They're round and they're smooth and glossy and shiny. So you want to start thinking about, how can I make this look kind of like it's got body or shape. This is my light blue, so I'm just going to smush a bit of that on. If you have a lighter blue or whatever colour you're using, just put a little bit of that in. I can see in the eyes there's a little bit of, I don't know, bits of light. There's so much pattern in there, isn't there? So I've just lightly touched a bit of the blue on there, and I'm going to dab that in now too, because I'm trying to create that really interesting pattern that I can see in the eyes. And I'm just dabbing it. If I blend it now, it'll start to get a bit muddy and dirty, but if you just dab it, then hopefully it'll still push it in, but it won't kind of get lost in with the other blues, which is exactly what I just did. So then I can come back with my other blues. So just play with your blues until you feel like you've got it looking the way you want it. And don't worry about the shine on there yet. We'll do that after. I just want to look at the blues that are in the eyes and work on getting those to be lovely and bright. And I can see on their right eye, or the bottom eye, it's actually a little darker around the pupil area. So just noticing those things and where it kind of gets darker and folds away from you. There's also a slight shadow on that bottom eye under the eyelid. It's only very slight, and there's another shadow on the top eye coming across on the bottom there. As the light's coming from there, but the skin of the eyelid is casting a shadow over it. So this is when you start to think about form and how things sit within each other. So, you know, looking at these eyes, we know that they're in behind the fur, they're in the eye, in the head, and so they sit back a little bit. Because they're round, they bulge out. So that's where the brightness of them, the lighter parts, come forward, because they're a round sphere shape. And so the closer part of the eye to us is the part that's poking out more, I guess you could say. And so that's got a little bit more light on it because it's catching the light. And the other part of the eye that's sinking down behind the eyelids has more shadow. I'm just going to try the purple in here and see what that does for some shadow, because I want to get a bit of shadow, see around in there on the bottom of that top eye. I know that looks a bit stupid now, but once I push that in and soften it off, it should make some more sense. And if you feel you don't have the right colours that you've picked out earlier, you know, don't be afraid to go pick up more colours. I'm just feeling like I might want a darker blue just to emphasise the blueness of that. So here on this left side of the top eye, I feel like there's more shadow in there. I feel like I need to make that even darker. I'm going to be a bit daring and pick up my blue violet and just put a tiny smudge of it across here, because I want to build up the shadow even more. Because if I do that, then that's going to help the eye to look rounder and give it that beautiful glow that I want. So it's a little bit purple at the moment, but I think once I get my edge of my eye, I'm just going to see what that will look like. I'm using my charcoal now so I can get a finer line with that, just to see, will that look all right? And then ignoring all this stuff under here, because that'll be darker anyway with fur. But the colour in the eyeball, is that dark enough, that shadow? I don't know, I feel like it needs to be a bit darker. I think I might have to go and find a darker blue. I will. I'm going to go and find a darker blue pastel. I just want that to have a bit more depth. Okay, so I've got this one, which is quite dark. It's almost like a black. It's a real navy blue. I'm not sure what it's called. Hoping it's not too soft. But I just feel like that might be a better option over the purple to create a bit more shadow. Because we want these eyes to really catch our attention. That's nice. That's a bit better, I think. It's got a bit more depth to it. And then I've just dabbed a little bit of it down and softly pulled it through there. So we get that nice feeling of the bulging of the eye. So it looks like it's kind of folding away from us into the eyelid or the head. And I'm just going to redraw this line with my charcoal. I might need to use a black pencil or charcoal pencil or even black pastel pencil. Black pastel, just pastel on its own would be fine. Yeah, I feel like, see how that started to give it some depth now? So you've got to muck around a little bit with your shadows and your lights. You've got to really hone in on one spot and focus on, you know, the colours and the shadows and what's going on in there. And so when I study this eye in particular, you can see it's a little bit lighter just in this side. This is pale blue I'm putting in. A little bit lighter there. And it's a little bit lighter on the other side as well. I've only put a little bit down. Make sure you wipe your fingers off because you don't want to put dirty charcoal into these light bits. Oops, which I just did. And so that's giving my blue a nice range of tones in there. And then, of course, you know, you've got these little, zoom in on this so I can see it better. There's not a real lot of detail inside there. So I might just leave that as it is. So I'm quite content with the colours I've got going on in here now. So see, that's taken 4 or 5 colours just to get that bluish shine that I was looking for. So sometimes, often, mostly, we don't have the exact right colours that you might want for something. So you've got to mix it and make it and just experiment with different things and see what works. Sometimes it doesn't work. And if that's the case, then you just kind of push it in and start again. You can always try fixative too. If you end up with too much pastel on your paper and you can't get any more down, spray it with a fixative and that will fix all the layers underneath, and then you'll be able to add a few more over the top. Some people use hairspray, and I had a girl in at work the other day swearing that hairspray was the best thing ever. And fixative was terrible, but I'm not convinced. I don't know. I don't think hairspray is very good because it will yellow after a while, and it's also not archival or acid-free. So I wouldn't advise anyone to use hairspray. Although I'm sure some of you have and you're not going to tell me. Okay, just needed a sip of coffee there. So let's do the black of the eye. So I'm going to use my charcoal for that. You might have a pastel pencil you want to use. If you've only got a piece of pastel, then try that. Again, we just need to figure out where this is exactly in the picture. So I'm just going to go lightly with it until I'm sure that I've got it in the right spot. I think that's about where it needs to be. Check the angle too. I just realised that it's on a slight angle. And if you muck it up and you need to get it off, just grab your kneadable eraser and dab it off and it'll be fine. Especially if you've used charcoal, because it's such a lovely soft medium and it's quite easy to remove. And if you've now left a bit of a stain, you can just come back in with a bit more glue and patch it up. So the nice thing, I love this about pastels, is that you can kind of patch things up as you go. You can redo things, you can go over things, and you know, it's not hard and fast and stuck there forever, basically, because it's such a pliable medium. And that's the nicest thing about it, I think, is that it's so movable and it's not permanent. Okay, so I've just marked in the pupil. I'll need to get some dust off there because it's got too much. But I feel like that's in the right spot. And once we outline the bottom of the eyelid and get all the dark around there, I think that'll all start to come together nicely. Notice at the top of the eye, so the hair that runs across the top of the eye, we've got a little dark line there, but most of it's light. or white. And then around the bottom of the eye, we've got this dark rim. Again, I'm using charcoal. If you want it to be blacker, you might have charcoal pencils, which are often darker because they're a compressed charcoal. This is a willow charcoal, so it's quite soft and not very dark. So you won't get a real black mark with a willow charcoal. They're kind of a dark grey. That's coming together. Just going to tip off my dust. Okay, and so I can see the end of that needs a little bit of refining. Now I've picked up my pastel pencil because I know this is going to be a bit blacker, and I can probably get a little bit more control over the shape. So the shape of this part is sort of, it's got rounded ends and then it comes into not a V, but a soft V, I guess, at the base. I haven't quite got my shape right. Something like that. And then I'm going to sharpen up the edge of my eye with my pencil as well, because this is a really strong focal point through there. And then where the little tear duct is, you can see the skin's a little bit lighter in there. So I'm going to maybe just leave the charcoal in there and let that do its thing. There is a bit of a brown kind of colour through there. So if you do have a little bit of, did I pick up a brown? No, I didn't. I'll try this little bit of red then, magenta. Pop a bit of that in there just for fun. I'll put some of that down through here as well. So that's the skin or the area in the tear duct. And there's also a little shine in there. Can you see that on the between the eyeball and the tear duct? There's a little white shine just in there, so we can pop that in after. And then we've got the shine in the eye as well, and that'll bring the whole thing to life. I'm just going to give a bit more shadow in here. I feel like I've lost my shadow now. So you can come back in and fix things up and put them in and take them out. Do all that sort of stuff until you start to get it to look how you want it to. And don't forget, there's different ways you can, put the pastel down too. You can dab it down with your fingers, or you can rub it. So different textures will require different gestures, I suppose. And then they rhymed. So for instance, this part here where I just want to get a bit more shadow into the eyeball, and I want it to sort of be a soft edge so it's not too a hard line. And I'm just sort of dabbing it gently until it kind of merges in with the other blue. And then I feel like this line comes down there. So I've got the nose there. So that's looking okay. Around the outside of the eye, we've got to put some more dark underneath here because it's quite black around there, isn't it? This is what makes the eyes pop, because we've got this really dark hair or skin around the eye, and then there's so bright blue. I'm just using my blue violet around here, trying really hard not to get it into the actual eye because it stains. Darkening that off. And if you find that's not dark enough, you can always use a black pastel. So I tend to kind of save the black for last if I need. It's a little bit like saving the light for last. If I need something really black, then I'll grab a pastel, and a black pastel or a pencil like this, and get it really nice and black. So I'm just doing that with a pencil now. And I know there's more light hair around the outside of this part, but we can put that in afterwards. Just really want to focus on this eye at the moment. Put the angle on that one. It's a bit wide, I think. My pupil's a bit wide. I'm just going to try and remove some of it. So removing pastels can be tricky. So you can see here it's left a stain. So I'm trying to get that off because I want to make it narrower. Felt like it was a bit too big. So first I've got to put my blues back in so that when I put the pupil in, I've got my blue already in place. And then I'm just going to make it a bit narrower because I don't think it's as fat as what I have. It's better. And then I'm going to darken that off as much as I can. It's actually tricky sometimes to get something really dark because pastel is so chalky. You know, it's hard to get it to get super black, basically. I think that'll do for now. And then if you feel like you want to see what the light looks like, just tip off my dust again. So we can have a bit of a preview of what, you know, what's going to happen when we put some light in here. So what I've got is is this white? No, it's a kind of a grey colour. So I'm still going to save my light for last. I'm going to put some light in here, then I can add white if I need to get it even brighter. So this is just a short piece of pastel. And I'm just looking at the shapes of the light in here. So it looks like a window or something, doesn't it? The reflection in the eye. It's like a little kind of rectangle. So what I'm trying to do is emulate that. And what you don't want to do once you put this down is stick your fingers in it. If you do, you're going to lose the brightness and it'll just go muddy. And there's a little shine on the iris as well. And remember that little bit of light just inside the eye too, around over here. So I can use the edge of my pastel to do that. You might prefer a pencil, but because this pastel's got quite a sharp little edge on it, I can use that to make a fine line. So use that because it was in my hand already and it'll match the other colour. And I know now if I want to get that, you know, one section of this little shine in the eye even brighter, then I can add a blob of white afterwards. That looks like it's come to life, doesn't it? It's amazing what a bit of shine will do. So that'll do for now. I might come back and clean that up a little bit later. Let's get on to the other eye and get that one complete too, so then we can move out into, you know. So over here on this one, I had a bit of darker blue in the center, and then it seems to get a little bit lighter blue towards the edges. So I'm going to pop my lighter blue around the edges. And then softly just dab that in, because if I blend it, it will just kind of will merge with everything else and it'll lose its vibrancy. Okay. So there's also shadow on this one. It's not as much as the other one, but it seems a little darker just in here, sort of in the center area and under the top of the eyelid. So what I'm going to do is just pour a little bit of darker blue across the top of that there, just a tiny bit, and then push that in gently with my finger. So what I'm doing is I'm putting my finger down on the edge and pulling it in towards the eye, so that I'm just getting a lovely soft shadow effect there without making it a really strong line. And it's a nice darker blue in the middle there. It's even darker than I thought. Oh, nice. Trying to darken that off with a couple of my blues to make the eye have some volume in it. And then of course we've got the little tear duct area in there as well. So I'm going to grab my stick of charcoal again and just get the edges back in. So you can see there's an edge across the top of the eye, and then around the base of the eye. And then we've got that little tear duct area or the skin area there. So the outline of the eye is quite angular on each end, isn't it? But the inside of the eyeball is rounder. And then we've got the tear duct and skin area. So I want to kind of define those edges a little bit more and then bring out the outside of the eye here. So the tear duct, I'm just thinking what colour can I put in that just to lighten it up a little bit. I probably need to do that on the other one too now. Think about it. Try a bit of purple. Purple in there. While I've got purple in my hand, I'll stick it somewhere else. So it's a bit of a habit that I've picked up. If I grab one colour for something, I'll just put it around in other spots, just so that it's not only in one place. Something like that. And then later on we can look at how that's going to work with everything. Just cleaning my fingers off again because I want to get in here and start to sort of pull out some of that purple tear duct area so that it's not super bright purple, but I want it to be not as black, because then when I come back in with my black, I can get a nice hard outline around that, really define the shape of the eye and still leave that area there with some skin. I've just got my black pencil now, hardening up that line to sharpen the outline a little bit more. Okay. All right, so then we've got to put the pupil in. So again, just checking the shape of that and where it sits. So it sits slightly off to the left, not quite, not a lot, but slightly. And then just roughly drawing in, or lightly drawing in the shape of that to make sure we get it in the right spot. I'm using my pastel pencil this time. You can use charcoal if you prefer, because it's easier to get off if you mark it up. But I'll put it in with my pencil and then colour it and darken it off. I want to get it as dark as I can. And the risk is the more you colour it, the wider it gets, isn't it? It's always the way. We just tend to make things bigger because we're colouring them in. So try hard not to do that. Cool. And then I'm just looking at it again, feeling like I need to add more dark around that area. It's just a little bit too light in the middle there. This is my dark blue. Just doing that and then just softly dabbing that through with my finger again. There we are. Lovely. And a bit more black in there to darken that off a bit more. Just checking the angle of it. Tip off some dust. So that's starting to come together now. Once we get the shine in, it'll make all the difference. Just noticed I want to get a bit more dark down inside where around the tear duct area where the blue eye section is. Just going to darken that off. Dab it lightly with my fingers, and then I'll have to sharpen up those outlines again with my pencil, just to make that nice and strong through there. This pupil needs to be a little bit longer. So that's that bit. And then we can just look at the lights and the darks around in the tear duct area. So in the skin there, on the edge of the eye, put a few little shadows and things in there to try and give that some texture and body. Yeah. And then just for fun, we can pop some shine or light onto the eye over here, because that makes me happy. Better tip dust off first. Make sure you've got a nice clean finger when you pick up your light pastel or your white. This is my off-white, so remember I'm saving my white if I need it for later. So there's a little shine just there. And then there's a soft, can hardly see it, little shine there. And then we've got a nice little rectangular sort of shine there. Like that. And he's come to life now. So once we get some of that fur in around the eyes, it'll really make the eyes pop. Because you'll have the light against the dark. Lovely. All right, so I think that will be enough work on the eyes for now. We can always come back and touch them up if you need to afterwards. Let's get stuck into some of this fur. So it shouldn't take too much longer to do this because we're going to be using quite loose marks and not, it's not as much detail and focus as the eyes are. So now we've got our dark fur down. Let's pick up some of the light. So I've got my mid-grey and my light grey. That must be what I used in the eyes, the light grey. And so what we want to do now is just pick up your mid-grey. So this is not the darkest. It's dark, but not the darkest colour that we've used. And just smush some of that around so I can see some of the mid-grey in the fore there. There's some really dark areas, but then there's some mid-tones as well. So I'm just going to zhoosh some of that around. And then there's also kind of stripes in the arm as they head off into the background. And then it gets lighter in the background. So maybe this cat's like a whiter or, a light ginger, or I don't know if cats do that. But anyway, up here on the arm where it wanders off into the background. And then I'm just going to zhoosh some of this grey around in the face area. So put it on its side, a little stick of pastel, just pop it on its side and do the same thing as last time. Just run it around up and down in the direction that you see the hairs growing. What we're going to do is build up some layers now. And I think putting some of that purple down before was quite nice because it's giving me a nice mid sort of colour to work with. Go all the way to the edge so that you've got the cats coming off the page basically. And so I'm just smushing some of this light around. Now you see around the bottom of the face there where it's coming under the nose, it's quite light, but it's not super light, it's not bright light, it's sort of a mid. So you want to put a bit of this in there as well because it's still in shadow and it doesn't get light until it comes up beyond the where the shadow line, where the light's starting to hit it. So what we're doing is just smooshing this around, getting some pigment onto the paper. Now, in the nose area, you can see we've got that olivey green kind of colour, but then on the bottom side it's quite dark because there's shadow there. So I'm going to pop some of my greeny colour in there like now. Again, we popped it in before, but I'll put a little bit there now. And then just wander your eyes around and think, well, where else is this colour? Is this colour anywhere else in here? And I can kind of see some of it in the core. Not big lots, but there's a little bit of that colour around and about. So just smush it here and there. Don't put too much down. I just want to put a little bit around and about. There might even be a little bit down in the mouth area there. Okay. So now I've got that going on. What I want to do is put some lights in next. So let's first tip off dust or brush it off, or what you need to do to get your dust off your page. And we're not going to blend just yet. So if you pick up your light pastel, so I'm not going to use, I've got this cream Australian grey one. I don't know if that's too light, but anyway, we'll see. And I'm going to smush a bit of that around where I can see the lighter colours. So that's at the back here of the, like the shoulder of the cat, where it's sort of bleeding off onto the page. There's a bit of light there. And I can see some light areas, you know, they're like stripes on the arms here, on the arm. So I'm just kind of putting a few light marks across there. On the top or the ridge of the paw, you can see the lights catching the little hairs there. So I'll put some light there. I know this looks weird at the moment, but once we push it in a little bit and then start doing a bit more detail, it will make more sense. So pop some light around the edge of the face. What we're doing is tracing or following the edge of the face down through here. I'm still keeping my lines really soft, so if you have a short bit of pastel, just sort of lie it down on your page, keep it flat on your page and just push it around gently. We don't want to be making really hard, strong marks just yet. What we're doing is just finding all the light parts and putting a bit of light fur type colour down. And above the eye here, so I can't see what I'm doing, my hand's in the way, I have to go right-handed, hope that works out. So just in here above the eye, it's really light there, isn't it? And I think that's such a nice focal point there, where it gets light and then goes into the eye area. So with that beautiful ridge of the nose, it's a really nice line or arc that comes around through there and then tapers off as it gets onto the nose area. So that's a lovely, lovely thing or feature. We've also got light here on the outside of the eye underneath there. Just notice the shape of that hair there. So, and up through the head, a few little wispy light bits up through there. And then again across the other eye with this lovely bright hair just on the top there. And then there's some more underneath as well. Like that. And then down on the nose, so on the little face and around the mouth area, we've got a lighter tone. You can see that's quite bright. There's a little bright spot just here under the nose. And then it kind of gets darker as it folds away down towards the bottom of the page. The nose looks funny at the moment, but we'll get back to that. I'm just going to add a bit of light. We'll pop the pink in there. Add a little bit of light to this side here. The thing is, if you need to add more dark again afterwards, you can come back and put more dark on. So it's not like you can't, you know, keep adjusting as we go. Where the pink's going to go, I'm going to put a bit of this light down first, and then I'll pop pink over the top with a little bit of noise there. That's probably enough light for now. I'll put that one down. Now what I want to do is just start to kind of push all of this in so that we can then add more over the top. So this is still blocking in. It's still building up, you know, the layers and getting, excuse me, getting the tones into the right spot. And then we'll start working on the finer hair and so forth. So just press lightly and remember to press in the direction of the thing. So for instance, this area here between the face and the leg is quite dark. So I want to kind of push that right in and get it nice and dark, because we can't see what's in there. We know, we can imagine, but I'm going to push it in nice and dark so that it kind of disappears into the background. Then when we put the bright fur around the edges of it, of the face of the cat, that's what's going to really shine. So don't be afraid to push pretty hard in that section there. And wipe your finger off in between as well. Then coming over into the foot there at the foreground, so I'm just going to push that around. Softly blend all of that in, because that's just it's just a bunch of shapes in different tones, really, isn't it? We can come back in and, you know, define those a little bit more afterwards. But for now, we just want to get all of this sort of stuck onto the paper. And then as I move up the leg area with my finger, I'm just going to do these little up and down fluffy kind of movements with my finger. So that I'm going to start to kind of communicate the texture of the fur. And then as we move up and up and up, then it's going to disappear behind that light section at the back there. So see how by pulling my finger in the direction, like little up and down movements, it's starting to look like it's got that furry sort of effect. And once we come back over it again and get a bit more detail in, it'll get even furrier. But this is a good foundation. Just clean up this edge here. And then depending on what colour background you've got, so I've got a light background, but my cat fur is actually lighter. So what I'm going to do is do the same kind of thing, but just have this really soft edge there. Probably should have rubbed out the charcoal mark first. Never mind. And take that all the way up to the top. So I've got this lovely soft light colour running up through there. I've got a bit of my darks mixed in there, so now it's got a nice sort of purple tinge. I'm going to say that's nice. I'm not sure whether it is or not, but that's what happened. And so that's kind of just wandering off into the background, because we don't want that to stand out or be a feature. We want that to sort of disappear off into the edges there and kind of not be anything definite. If you have trouble with that, like for instance, this blue is a much different colour to that, then I could, you know, put some of this down on the blue area and merge it all together so that it kind of just gets lost in the background. So I might do that, don't know yet. But for now, we'll just leave it as it is. And then coming back over into the face, so the same thing again, just pulling your finger around in the direction that the fur grows. So you can see on the sides of the face here, all the little furs, or bits of fur, kind of grow towards the outside of the face. So, and from down under the eye. So just look at the direction they're growing in and pull your finger in that direction. Just soft little furry movements in those directions, and see how that starts to then look like it's, you know, the coat of the fur. We want to try and make sure that we emulate the fur or the feeling of the fur. And whenever you're doing something like this, just notice the direction that it kind of grows in, and then pull the pastel around in that direction. You'd do the same if you had a paintbrush. You'd be pulling it around in the same direction as the thing. So, if you were doing this with a brush, then you would do, movements with the brush, little flicking kind of movements. And so you can do the same thing with your fingers. Little flicking movements or little rubbing movements in the direction of the fur. And don't worry that it's going to get all muddy and kind of not so bright or dark anymore. We can come in and strengthen those up. Right, so I just had a bit of coffee then. Again, around this eye, so I'm going to pull the fur. What I'm doing is I'm leaving my finger pretty much on the paper and just doing these little back and forth movements with my finger so that it starts to pull the pigment out. And see how by doing that now, I've got that bit of bright fur in there, and I'll come back and brighten that up afterwards, but it's now starting to feel like it's shining there on top of everything else. And again, above the head here, so same thing, just pull it in the direction that it grows. And again, I'm not lifting my finger up. If I was lifting my finger up each time, I'd be doing this kind of thing. And that actually gives you broken lines, and it also adds fingerprints. Every time you put your finger down, you're making your fingerprint. And that's not what you really want to achieve. So I find if I leave my finger on the paper, even if it's super light, and then just pull it across without lifting it up, I avoid making all those little fingerprints, and I avoid making broken lines. And so it becomes a lovely continuous kind of blend. So try to do that if you can. Just keep your finger on the paper and pull it around. And you can push it harder in some spots and lighter in others. But if you just keep it on there, you get a much nicer continuous sort of flow. And coming down into the nose. Funny little prickly hairs down on the side of the nose there. And then where the little pink nostril is, we'll come back and fix up the detail on that. So by now, you should have most of this pushed in. And so you've got your paper nice and full, and it's starting to, have a little bit of feeling of texture and body. And then just notice, where is it brightest and where is it darkest? And you can actually see that looking at your black and white version. So I can see on there that, for instance, this area here between the nose and the eye, just put too much light there. This area in here is kind of blurred. It sort of merges from light to dark to light to dark. So there's no defined strong line there. There's a vague line of a little bit lighter here, but it comes down quite dark inside here and then down onto the cheek. And so I can kind of look at the picture and go, okay, so that needs more shadow. And then again, looking at this side of the nose. So what I'm doing here, on this bottom side of the nose, it's quite dark there because it's in shadow. So I'm just pushing a bit harder with my finger. And because I've got pigment down already, when we put the darks down before, what's happening is the harder I push, the darker it gets and the more muddy it gets. And so it's starting to create that nice shadowy effect that I want. So you can kind of run your finger around, or run your eye around first, and just notice where it's dark and where it's light and where it's kind of merging between the two. So on the other side, between the eye and the nose, we've got a really strong dark area in here, and I can put more dark in there now. So darken up in there. So that's my blue violet. And then I can kind of push that in. And I don't want to push it in too much because then it gets light and muddy and blends in with everything else. So now we're starting to focus on getting some of the pigment to sit on the surface and show the detail. But it's quite dark in there, isn't it? Because that area there is a really strong light line and it needs more definition now because I've been sticking my fingers in there. But this area is really quite bright and light, and so we can work on brightening that up and then maybe outlining the eye just a tiny bit more with your pencil to sharpen up some edges. So now's the time to kind of look around and start really focusing on where you need to sharpen up some of those edges and get that black line in nice and strong. For instance, around the eye here, so that it really pops out, you know. And because when you blend and push things around, you do lose those really sharp edges. So sometimes you can go back in and make them stronger again. So run around with that. I'm just doing around the eyes where I can see that there's more defined lines. And then back around here under the nose. So the little nose has been neglected a little bit. So it's got quite a dark shape around the nose. And then it comes into shadow on that bottom side. And we've got a dark line across the pink, across the top of the pink section there. I better put my pink bit in there. So this is just a light pink pastel. If you don't have a pink one, then maybe you know, a bit of red and then add some white over it. And then there's a little shine. I don't know if you can see that just here on the edge of the nose. On the left side of the nose there's a shine. I need to clean up my nostrils, they look silly. Just there, there's a little shine. I can dab that softly. And then come back in. I'm going to do it with charcoal to start. So come back with some charcoal and just define some of those lines around the nostrils and the nose there. So it's a funny little shape in there. Funny when you look at something for too long, it looks really weird. Before when we hadn't looked at this for too long, it was fine, but now it looks weird. I think it's because we've got all that dark around it. We need to merge some of this off a little bit and just soften up some of the stuff there. Don't forget the little mouth. You can see the mouth area is a little bit darker than the cheeks. You kind of not emphasize that, but just make sure that you have that distinction between the cheeks and the mouth. And there's a little bit of light and sugar in here. That touch of light just there. So now we're noticing where all the little bits of light and dark are. I'm using, what is this, grey, light grey. Just to brighten that little bit up there. And then there's more bright on this side, because that's where the sun, where the light's coming from. So I've got to lighten all of this stir up over here. I'm using my light grey, so it's not white. I'm saving the white for later. See how now we're starting to kind of put these layers down on the top, but we're not going to blend them in again. We've already got our undercoat down, so now it's time to start kind of just laying this down on the surface and letting it sit there and be furry. And again, I've got the pastel on its side, so I'm just using it on its side and doing soft little marks. Now I'm coming around the eye here. So we've got all these little hairs around the eye. What I'm using is the end of my pastel because it's too fat otherwise. If I put the whole thing down, I'll cover too much area. So I'm just using the end of it and doing soft little squiggly lines like this to emulate the little white furs around there. Okay. Now, if you have pencils, you might want to go over this again and put more detail in. And that is entirely possible. We're going to run out of time in class, but I do want to get the basics down. There's a few little white hairs throughout all of this cheek area too, so you could do a few little soft marks just with the end of your pastel to get those little white hairs sitting there. They're looking a bit rough and ready at this point on mine, but you can always come back and refine it. So what we're doing now is we're just coming around with the white or the light colour, not white, off white or grey, just drawing in some of those hairy bits that are sitting on the surface, so especially around this eye area here, getting that nice and bright through there, and doing soft little drawing lines for the hairs. And so as we do this, we're building up the layers and getting it nice and fluffy and furry. So a lot of people like to use pastel pencil for this kind of thing, and it's amazingly good. It takes forever though. Very slow process. But if that's your gig and you want to keep building on this, you can absolutely do that. So this is, basically just the foundation part, I guess. What I'm doing now is just putting this down softly. See around the chin area there, it's not quite as bright as some of this lighter fur. I'm using the same colour, but what you do is you press much lighter and just do much lighter little marks. And because I've already got my grey or darks down underneath, it's still got that lovely grey kind of colour without being as bright as what's on the top here, because what's here is something I've pressed harder to make. So the harder you press, the stronger the colour will be. And then when you go light, it'll just kind of be transparent so you can see what's underneath it. So again, just running my pastel around here, letting it sit on the surface. I'm doing soft, it's on its side again. So you kind of adjust it to do different areas, I guess. If they're like longer hairs, then you can use the side of it. Once you get to the little shorter hairs, like they are here on the bridge of the nose, then I've tilted my pastel up and I'm just using the tip of it to get little short hairs in there. I'm being a little careless, I could probably spend a bit more energy on the detail, but I want to get this done in the time we've got left. So, as I said, if you want to stick with it and finish it off and use some pencils to get the detail in, that would be very cool. But you can see how by doing this, we're building up those lovely, lovely layers of fur. And then up, up on the top of the head here, so we've got some really nice little light sections there. And up the top here, we're getting some longer hairs, so you can do a few little longer strokes as well to get those to look like they're longer. So I think I've picked another picture that's going to take longer than about 2 or nearly 2.5 hours now. Never mind. Don't forget there's a little bit of light on the nose there, so just on the very edge, just in there, it's catching the light. And you can soften it off gently with your finger if it's a bit too bright. Got little bristly hairs on there too, so you want to try and get the feeling of that going on. Don't forget you can come back in with darks as well if you want to. If you feel like you've lost some of your darks and you need to darken something up, You'll always do that. I'm just going to wander over here to the leg, arm, and again, you can see that there's some really long little white hairs on there. So what I'm going to do now is start to mark those in. Hang on, first I might lighten up some of the stuff in the background a bit more. So the same, it's kind of that stripy pattern, isn't it, on the fur up here. So I'm just doing loose marks with my pastel on its side, so my light pastel, my light grey, just to get a bit more of that going on in there. And then I can start to just add a few little hairs. So you can see I'm using the tip of this pastel. So it's been broken before. And when you break them, sometimes it's good to break them because you get these nice sharp edges that you can actually use to make really fine lines. So I can put the edge on the page like that, and what I'm doing is little back and forth movements and kind of varying the direction that I'm pulling it in so that I get my little hairs to sort of stick up and crisscross it over each other in a couple of spots and just look like they're, you know, catching the light. And then if you want some to sort of stand out a bit more, just press a bit firmer to make them brighter, to make the pigment or the colour stick out a bit more. I think I'm doing grass now. I've got all sorts of things going on in here. So that's almost a finished cat. When you want to do whiskers, so we're just going to jump over to the whiskers. I'm going to put these hairs in under the eye again. I meant to come back and do that too, just with the end of my pastel again, so that you get those nice little short, crispy hairs in there. And of course, I need to add more dark under there as well to emphasize the shadow. Oops. So I'm just going to put some whiskers up through here. So see how now I was talking about before, when you make your background dark and then you put in light whiskers and hair and things over the top, it really helps to tell you what's behind and what's in front. So by putting my light little whiskers over this, I can now see that the face, you know, sits in front of everything, and the whiskers kind of pop forward because the background's a little bit darker. So that's fun, cool. And then there's also a few little, you know, those little grey spots in here that we put in earlier, but they've disappeared since. So now you might want to just run around and pop in a few of your dark spots that might have got lost, because things tend to get a bit lost when you're building up layers like this. I'm using dark grey, but I feel like I might be better off with a darker, like blue violet or even black, to get some of my darks back in there. So don't forget about your darks. Even though we put them in earlier, you might need to put them back in again, just to make them a little bit more strong, because the dark and the light is what makes these pop. So around the bottom side of the nose here, I'm just putting a bit of dark in there. This is the blue violet again, and it's quite strong. So I've got a lot of dust from that now, so I'll have to tip it off. But yeah, pull it down through there, around the nose and the eyes, and you can even put a few little dark hairs in amongst here, so that it starts to, you know, build up that lovely thick fur look. And put some more dark hairs up through here. So just because we put dark down first doesn't mean you can't come back with more afterwards. There's a bit more work to do on this guy. I'm hoping I'll get time to finish him off afterwards. Yeah, see how you kind of lose the darks when they start to blend, so you really do need to come back in and darken them all up again and make it more stronger, even in the little claw there, that little claw. So I need to put that back in, perhaps darken up behind here a bit more. And the nose could do with a bit more work, and then around the nose too, so we'll put little pink nostrils. Needs a bit more dark around those edges. And then notice the tiny little bits of light too that, you know, are shining on the edge of the nose and the nostrils. In places like that. I've got lots of dust, I'll have to tip that off again. Okay, so he's coming together. I'm just going to grab a black so you can see how much blacker black could be. So if you haven't used black and you do want to get even more dark, we did with pencil, but if I wanted to put some more black in here, for instance, you can see how much darker that is. So it creates a lot of drama, which is really nice in there. So I'll pour some of that around through there. Put a bit of it in here because there's a nice dark patch just there on the side of the nose and down through here. So this is why I like to save the black for last, because you kind of block in all your areas and then look at the picture, and that's when you know decide, well, I'm going to add a bit more tone or texture to this. And if you want it to be more emphasized and a bit more dramatic, that's when you grab your darks, your real darks. Sorry, not sure how to turn that off. Picked up my blue violet again, and I'm just sort of darkening off. So don't worry if you feel like you haven't got enough emphasis on things. You can add a few layers, and you can sort of keep going for quite a while before your paper gets full, and you can't add any more. And just got to keep fiddling around a little bit. And as I said earlier, if you find your paper fills up too quickly, just get yourself some fixative. So you can get fixative in a few different brands. The one I use is just a NAM, National Art Materials, and it's only about $13 for a spray can. So it's not super expensive. And it's really good if you want to keep building up your layers and you can't add any more pastel. So I think that might have to do us for today, because we're nearly at 2.5 hours, and I'm looking forward to seeing all your paintings. Don't forget to sign your artwork, so I'll just put my name somewhere else. And depending on where you sign it, you might want to use a light or a dark pencil. So I'll just pop it there. So that was my white charcoal pencil. And yeah, there's still a bit of work to do. I wouldn't mind spending another hour or so on this guy, just getting nice and complete. And if you've got time, then do that, because that would be really cool. It's so hard to get back to something, isn't it, if you can't get it finished and then, so I'll get back to that next week. And I don't know about you, but I don't. I try so hard, but I just can't do it half the time. But yeah, that was a fun one. So I'm just going to grab a little photo, and then I will switch over to the other screen. If you're watching the video, thank you very much for attending, and I hope that you enjoyed it a lot and that you learnt something, and I would really enjoy your feedback. Thanks for coming.